Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I love coming here to Orgiva, not only because of the community here, but the community that I feel is holding your community in these mountains. And I feel it so strong every time that I'm here. And it's really a huge blessing, feeling like there's something beyond the people here that are holding the hearts of the people here, and it feels like a really strong and beautiful container.
Es un placer estar aquí y sentir la comunidad, y la siento cada vez que vengo, y no solamente a la comunidad aquí, sino como algo mucho más amplio y algo que como que nos contiene a todos, un contenedor.
And I think, thinking about this topic of rites of passage, it's a beautiful topic, and I'm really glad that Sidi Abdul Malik asked me to speak on it, because it's not something that I normally speak on. Usually people hear me speak on Islamic psychology, and that's my thing, and I love talking about it, but there's so much more that it relates to. And this rites of passage is really a passion of mine that I've been working on the side, but haven't yet really spoken much about.
El tema de hoy, los ritos de paso, me alegra mucho que Sidi Abdul Malik me haya pedido hablar de esto, porque habitualmente hablo sobre psicología islámica, pero tiene muchas ramificaciones, y una de ellas es esto, de los ritos de paso, y que es una pasión mía que tengo. Así que me alegro mucho que hoy podamos hablar de esto.
And the notion of these, what I'm saying, of feeling the community in the mountains, if that's too abstract and people don't understand what I'm saying, is, this land is this place where there was a really strong Muslim community, and a lot of people were martyred, and there is a sense of awliya, of friends of Allah, that are basically our predecessors, our forefathers and mothers, our ancestors. We, in the Islamic tradition, we don't usually think of ancestors in the same way that a lot of other traditions do, in terms of ancestors being present and constantly talking about ancestors. But the reality is that there is a legacy that gets passed on in spiritual traditions that keeps the heart of the people alive. And what the heart of the people is, from an Islamic standpoint, is the heart of what Islam is supposed to be in a living tradition.
Y hablando de este sentido de comunidad en las montañas, si alguien no entiende lo que quería decir, porque puede ser un poco abstracto, este es un lugar donde había una comunidad musulmana durante muchísimo tiempo, y había muchos mártires y básicamente awliya's, amigos de Allah. Y estos son nuestros antepasados, nuestros ancestros, y desde el punto de vista islámico no pensamos en ancestros como habitualmente, como alguien de quien se habla siempre, que están aquí, sino más bien como una especie de legado que tenemos, que se mantiene en nuestro corazón, y en el Islam nuestro están presentes en nuestro día a día.
So this idea of tradition in Islam is not about looking backwards and re-implementing what the people in the past did and doing the exact same thing in this time. The Islamic tradition is the notion of tradition is a living tradition.
Esta idea de la traducción en el Islam no es una traducción de mirar hacia el pasado e intentar repetir lo que se hizo entonces. Es una tradición que está viva y en movimiento.
So what that means is that we look to, you could say we look to the past, but we look to the tradition, and we understand what are the first principles of that tradition. So what are the things that we understand that are anchors that hold together our pillars of Islam? And by pillars, yes, the 5 pillars of Islam, but really the pillars of belief, of aqida, of how we understand ourselves in the world, and how that translates into community and living in the dunya, living in each time.
Entonces lo que hacemos es, de estas tradiciones nos fijamos en que tienen unos principios fundamentales que nos sirven como de ancla, como pilares, y efectivamente los 5 pilares del Islam, pero también la aqida, nuestras creencias y cómo conseguimos hacer una comunidad que nos sostenga en el tiempo.
And so the job of every Muslim community throughout time is to understand the core tradition, but to bring it into this time and this what makes sense to contemporary people, to make it adapted and make it make sense based on the evolution of humanity. Right? So the humans evolve. We change from we didn't look this way when we were born, and the same thing as humanity evolves. Right? The Deen al-Fitra, Allah's dispensation of His Deen that He has brought, changed throughout time as humanity developed. It was updated for every era.
Entonces el trabajo de los musulmanes de la comunidad es entender estos principios básicos que existen y llevarlos y adaptarlos al mundo contemporáneo en ese momento, en qué es lo que se está viviendo en cada momento. Siguiendo el ejemplo de los antepasados, pero adaptándolo a la manera que la humanidad evoluciona. El ser humano evoluciona desde que nace, pues la forma que tenemos cuando nacemos es diferente a la que tenemos actualmente. Igual la humanidad pues va desarrollándose y el camino inicial, el Din al-Fitra que Allah mandó, ha ido cambiando a través de las diferentes etapas de la humanidad.
So that doesn't mean that it changes. Islam itself doesn't change. So even within we can look at the dispensation of the Deen from the one God, from Allah throughout time, and there are times when it changed based on different messages from different prophets. But now even within each, so we have the last message from the messenger, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we know that this is the final message. This is the perfected. He's perfected the Deen. But we don't know how long that dispensation of time is from the Deen being perfected to the end of this period, this time of living in the dunya. And so even within that dispensation of time that the message came, there is an evolution and a change of humanity. I mean, we see it in our lifetime. We're seeing things crumbling and falling and huge changes happening in the world. And so there is an adaptation that needs to happen to preserve tradition.
So Islam does not change. El Islam no cambia en realidad. No es que cambie, por cierto, pero sí podemos recordar que ha habido diferentes dispensas del Dios único a través de los tiempos de Allah, a través de los diferentes profetas, hasta que llegamos a la revelación al último profeta Muhammad, la paz sea con él. Y este último mensaje es desde entonces hasta el final de los tiempos, es el mensaje final. Pero no sabemos esta dispensa en realidad cuánto tiempo va a durar, es decir, cuánto tiempo queda desde ahora hasta el último día del juicio. Entonces, en este tiempo también van cambiando las circunstancias. En nuestra propia vida, en nuestro tiempo de nuestra vida, estamos viendo cómo hay cambios importantísimos en el día a día.
So, Rites of Passage is the title of this talk today, Rites of Passage. This notion of what are rites of passage, they are mechanisms of preserving tradition that exist in every culture. And they are things that mark transitions in life, right? So it has always been a way of preserving the principles of the philosophical and moral framework of any society and aligning that with the development of society through the development of individuals in that society.
Entonces la idea el ritos de paso, que es el tema de la charla de hoy, Siempre ha habido en las civilizaciones y culturas antiguas medidas de mantener las morales y la ética de la filosofía de vida de las diferentes en su momento, ¿no? Entonces marcan transiciones en nuestra vida, de pasar de un momento a otro dentro del marco de la vida en la que vivimos, ¿no? Y de manera para alinear nuestra vida en su momento con los fundamentos de la cultura.
So what it becomes is this way of regulating the healthy development of this process of preserving tradition as the evolution of humanity unfolds, but keeping in place how we sort of understand the pillars, the anchors that anchor us to grounding us in truth and reality while we are experiencing life in this dunya, which is fluctuating, right? So our individual human lives fluctuate, the whole world fluctuates. There's times when there's difficulty, there's times when there's ease. And the anchors within our moral, spiritual, societal frameworks that are connected to our cosmology, our way that we understand our relationship with Allah, is what allows for that transition to happen, but stay grounded to these principles.
Entonces estos ritos de paso son una manera de regular el desarrollo sano, digamos, de las personas a través de sus momentos vitales. Se convierten en pilares en los que se ancla, en los que se fundamenta cómo adaptamos la realidad última a nuestras experiencias vitales que van cambiando y que van fluctuando. Es como los anclas de la filosofía y la estructura moral de nuestra vida. Y nos ayuda a irnos ajustando a esto según vamos desarrollándonos.
Shorter? I'll
Too
try.
many good ideas. Just a buena mesa.
So, rites of passage can be at any point there is a transition in life. So there's rites of passage for when a woman is pregnant with a child. So even before birth, right? The way that the family takes care of the woman when she's giving birth. There's rites of passage at birth. Right? We know in the Islamic tradition the baby is supposed to stay indoors for 40 days. There's rites of passage for the process of youth. There's rites of passage for marriage. There's different traditions that mark different points of transition throughout life.
Entonces tenemos diferentes, en el día a día, en nuestra vida, diferentes maneras de marcar las transiciones. Por ejemplo, cuando una mujer se queda embarazada, cómo se comienza a tratar la familia, comienza esta mujer. Cuando nace el bebé, hay una tradición de mantener el bebé, tiene que estar recogido y en su casa durante 40 días. Los pasos durante la juventud, el casarse, etc. Son diferentes intervenciones y momentos en la vida que ayudan a pasar, o sea, estos ritos ayudan a hacer el paso de uno a otro.
So a lot of these rites of passage are embedded in cultural practices. And you're going to find that they're different amongst different cultures. So different geographic areas, different places where they have a local urf or cultural orientation to their local regional customs.
Entonces vamos a ver que estos ritos de paso son diferentes en diferentes culturas. Entonces cada cultura tiene sus propios urf, su estructura, su manera de entender cómo va pasando de un estadio a otro.
And so, whereas this can be really clear when you're dealing with a, let's say, tribal culture or a ethnic culture that sustains and it stays in a geographic region, when we're talking about Islam, this transcends culture. We tend to have a difficult time understanding that because many of us learn Islam embedded in a culture. And but if you look at probably even the people in this room, or oftentimes the representation of our ummah, you know, when the beautiful thing that I love praying Juma, you look down the line and you see people wearing different clothing from different customs, and they're all Muslim, but we have different traditions and different customs from different areas, and there's Muslims all over the world in almost every culture.
Y esto puede ser quedar muy claro en una cultura tribal o una cultura tribal donde hay un límite geográfico y la cultura está basada alrededor de esto, pero sin embargo el Islam trasciende este tipo de cultura. Entonces nosotros hemos aprendido el Islam embebido en una cultura concreta, ¿no? Por ejemplo, dice el doctor que cuando vas a la Yoma y ve gente que está vestida, gente de todos colores, vestida con diferentes ropas, con diferentes traducciones, todos somos musulmanes, pero cada uno tiene diferentes maneras de representarse.
So because of that, these different cultures, it's a beautiful thing, and it's a mercy Allah tells us it's a mercy, this diversity. But what that means is that there has always been an allowance and a dispensation for there to be different cultural nuances in different cultures. So the Prophet ﷺ, when he was going around and teaching Islam, he would always adapt it to the local customs and culture. He wouldn't say, you have to stop what you're doing and do this Islamic thing. Islam was the principles and the values and the moral framework that could fit in with the local urf, the customs and the culture.
Y esta diversidad es algo muy bello, pero también nos indica que ha habido siempre una dispensa para tener en cuenta estas diferencias, ¿no? Estos diferentes matices. El profeta, la pasa con él, por ejemplo, cuando enseñaba Islam, no decía, tenéis que dejar de hacer lo que hacéis ahora, así directamente, sino que lo adaptaba a cada una de las diferentes costumbres que tenían entonces, ¿no?
So because of that, we have different customs, different rites of passage amongst different cultures, but there are Islamic principles that we find as a thread throughout. Now, what has happened though is that as modernity has happened and Muslims have spread out amongst the world, and there's a lot of us living in the West, in Western worlds, away from these local customs and cultures, plus people like me who are converts to Islam who don't have a culture that's embedded with Islamic principles. So we have a whole host of people that are disengaged or disaggregated from these local urf, these customs that held in place these rites of passage that allowed for these Islamic principles to get passed on in transitions in life.
Entonces estos diferentes estadios, estos ritos de paso, son diferentes, pero los principios islámicos están ahí como una especie de hilo que los une. Sin embargo, en la modernidad, los musulmanes se han extendido por toda la tierra, y sobre todo en el mundo occidental ahora, y se han metido en culturas que no tienen esta textura subyacente para soportar las costumbres del Islam. Y incluso algunos de nosotros, muchos de nosotros, por ejemplo, el mismo nosotros que somos aquí conversos al Islam, no hemos recibido el Islam dentro de una cultura que soporta y que apoya estos ritos de paso.
So this is a really important example of how we need to update the Islamic tradition to meet the needs of the current time. So it may be like in certain places in the world, this wouldn't be needed. They're still living in smaller geographic cultural areas where they have cultural traditions in place. So they would have rites of passage in place where the Islamic principles are embedded in that, and that allows for the development of healthy societies.
Entonces es importante este ejemplo porque nos permite ver que necesitamos actualizar nuestros comportamientos y la cultura y el Islam, su manifestación, para ajustarnos, adaptarnos al entorno. Todavía existen personas que viven en culturas más pequeñas, que están geográficamente limitadas, y ahí ellos viven en sitios donde la propia cultura arropa y da apoyo a estos principios islámicos.
So for those of us living in the contemporary West and in these disaggregated communities where we're a mix of lots of different cultures, it becomes incumbent upon us to find new ways of keeping these rites of passage to allow for the healthy development of Muslim societies in the Ummah. And we find this really most problematic in our youth.
Entonces, para todos los que vivimos especialmente en el mundo occidental, donde hay esta mezcla de culturas, es nuestra responsabilidad encontrar maneras de poder incorporar esto en nuestro día a día, los principios del Islam en nuestro día a día. Y esto es principalmente importante para nuestros jóvenes.
Because young people, as they're developing into adults, which will then become the leaders of societies. And right now, what's happening is we have a whole group of young people growing up, and they're very conflicted and confused with their Muslim identity. What does it mean to be Muslim in a world where there's Islamophobia and there's living in Western societies that have very different values, and they need to engage and work within these different moral frameworks, and there isn't a local community that's holding in place how to live as a Muslim in this world in a way that develops and stays strong in their epistemological and ontological foundational frameworks of how we understand ourselves in relation to God in this world.
Porque los jóvenes se van desarrollando y se convierten en nuestros adultos y se convertirán finalmente en los líderes de la sociedad. Y sin embargo están viviendo ahora en una situación pues confusa, donde no está claro qué quiere decir ser musulmán, viven en una sociedad en la que hay mucha islamofobia y necesitan y no tienen esa especie de comunidad que les apoya para crecer, para saber cómo crecer y desarrollarse en musulmanes, de manera que su filosofía, su epistemología se vea apoyada.
So it's really important that we understand not only the dynamic of the development of the human being and why the stage of youth in the development is so fundamental for healthy societies. Because as you can imagine, the way that young people develop is going to impact where we're going in the future, how we're able to stay grounded in our the truth of our spiritual principles and keeping these alive and healthy. And so what's really, I think, important is understanding the cycle of life and the stages, just briefly to understand where, so this is, I'm going to draw this, it's taken from the Imam Haddad's Lives of Man.
Entonces necesitamos comprender la dinámica del desarrollo del ser humano y cómo afecta en particular el desarrollo de los jóvenes para un desarrollo sano de la sociedad. Porque cómo se desarrollan y cómo conseguimos que se desarrollen los jóvenes va a impactar al final el futuro de nuestra sociedad y qué efecto va a tener sobre nuestro Islam. Va a demostrar un diagrama del ciclo de la vida y los estadios que tiene de acuerdo con el concepto del libro de Imam Haddad, Las vidas del hombre.
Okay, so this is we know that we come from Allah.
Venimos de Allah
and we return to Allah.
Y volvemos a Allah.
And we're with Allah. We know that we all existed before this life.
Sabemos que todos existimos antes de esta vida.
And then we come into this heavenly womb. So this is Ar-Rahman, Rahma. Right?
Rahma.
And this point, would be
Es el El útero divino.
This would be conception.
Eso es la concepción.
Sorry, no. Conception and birth.
Y aquí es el nacimiento.
So there's all kinds of
Primero
amazing.
pone el útero divino y aquí es el útero terrenal.
So there's a lot to be said of just even what is happening in this process of coming into the world. We won't focus on this, but we have different stages. So
Tenemos diferentes estadios. Se podría decir mucho, pero de momento hay diferentes estadios.
there's the heavenly womb, the earthly womb, then we're born. So even before birth, we have this different lives.
O sea, antes de nacer aquí tenemos diferentes vidas ya.
And then from birth until age 21,
Y del nacimiento hasta la edad de 21 años,
we could say that we have 3 stages in between this one.
hay 3 estadios intermedios aquí dentro.
But this essentially is the point where we want to focus on. Why? Because it's like we said, the most important. After 21, we have then adulthood.
Entonces, este primer estadio son 3 diferentes, pero nos queremos enfocar ahí porque es el que hemos dicho que es el más importante. Luego tenemos ya la madurez.
So this period of adulthood is where, don't pay attention to the length of these things.
No hagáis caso de la longitud relativa de
Inshallah, this will be longer for all of us.
Esto tendría que ser inshallah más largo para todos.
And I apologize. This is just the word that is used by Imam Haddad is the decline. But the reality is the decline because we see that as a bad thing because we tend to see death as something that's problematic. But it's just another stage of life.
Pero esto de declinar esta palabra que utiliza Imam Haddad, porque tendemos a ver la muerte como algo negativo, pero en realidad es un estadio más de la vida.
Because it's a decline from separation, really. The separation, and it really is
Declinar de la separación.
a return to Allah.
Una vuelta a Allah.
And then there's the akhirah.
Y luego estamos en el ákhira.
We'll have life in the akhirah.
Nuestra vida,
So the life doesn't stop here.
la vida no acaba ahí.
Okay? So now, within this period of, we could say, childhood or youth,
Dentro de este periodo, podríamos decir infancia o juventud,
the reason this is so important is because this is what is going to determine the human beings that we have that are in leadership, that are influencing society, that are, fundamentally carrying forward the state of humanity here. And that's going to be determined on what happens between 0 and 21.
¿Por qué es tan importante esta fase? Es porque lo que ocurre en esta fase determina luego el tipo de personas y de líderes que van a dirigir nuestra sociedad. Por eso es así importante esta primera fase.
So, we know from the tradition, Ali ibn Abi Talib said that you should, for child rearing, play with them for 7, teach them for 7, and befriend them for 7. So for the first 7 years of the child's life, that we should be engaged with them in play. Because this is how the nafs, as it's developing, is oriented to the world. And they need to be held in mercy and this place of feeling safe. And so the more that we invest in play with the children, what we're doing is we're already starting this process of leading them towards rites of passage, of the healthy development of the soul.
Dijo Sayyidina Ali que a los niños de 0 a 7 había que jugar con ellos, de 7 a 14 enseñarles y de 14 a 21 hacerse como sus amigos. Y es muy importante que de 0 a 7 es una etapa muy importante en la que les abrazamos como dentro de la misericordia y del juego y para que ellos se vean soportados y abrazados aquí dentro.
So what is happening, we're making an investment in the child at this point to feel mercy and love and being held in safety with the parent or with the community that is raising, so that then the child is ready to, when it gets to 7 to 14, this is the time when we teach them, right?
Por eso en los primeros 7 años, muy importante que se sientan acogidos en misericordia, amor, juego y seguridad, para que luego llegue el momento de los 7 a los 14, es cuando empezamos ya a enseñarles.
And so when we're thinking of rites of passage, oftentimes we think of usually in most cultures, there's around age 13 or 14, they have rites of passage that is about, children becoming adults, coming into manhood or womanhood.
Cuando pensamos en los ritos de paso, pensamos normalmente en esa época, la mayor parte de las culturas antiguas tenían entre los 13 y los 14 años, tenían un rito de paso que era pasar de niños a ser ya adultos.
But based on this developmental trajectory, we wouldn't wait until this age to engage them in this process of tarbiyah or futuwwah, and I'll define those terms in a minute, but we would be already starting from the beginning by playing, but then in 7 to 14 would be teaching them principles of life, of deen, of spirituality, spiritual laws and principles, but in a way that is leading towards their development. So this is not just in ta'lim, but tarbiyah. So ta'lim is the teaching intellectually with books, and tarbiyah is this experiential learning of the development of character and the development of the human being.
Entonces, en nuestra cultura, en esta estructura de pensamiento, no esperaríamos hasta los 14 años para empezar esto que está en el tarbiyah y el futuwwah, sino que empezamos de antes a que vayan acostumbrándose a poder abordar la vida y poder, desde el punto de vista espiritual y estructural. Entonces tenemos la tarbiyah, ta'lim, que es enseñar a través de libros y de conceptos analíticos, la tarbiyah, que es más a través de la experiencia, ¿no? y del juego.
So each one of these really represents a transition, but the fundamental one, when we think of rites of passage, does mark this because it is the place where the child is moving into being mukhallaf, being responsible for their actions. And we are wanting to gear them into a place of responsibility so that they can be upstanding members of society that are holding their values in place and that they're having clean hearts, right? Because we get corrupted societies from having corrupted hearts.
Y este último paso, el de los, digamos, 14 años, es fundamental porque es aquí donde empezamos a considerar a esta persona como alguien responsable por sus acciones. Entonces necesitamos desarrollar gente que sean responsables de lo que hacen y que tengan corazones limpios y de buena intención, porque es muy importante tener tener limpio el corazón.
So we have examples and a lot of rich tradition in the Islamic tradition if we look at different periods of time where there were these processes of futuwwah. So we have in many different eras and many different societies, but oftentimes we look to the Ottoman era when there was these futuwwah guilds. And what this consisted of was a community of young people, and particularly there would traditionally be a focus on young men, and it's not that women also have rites of passage of development, but the idea is that in societies historically, traditionally, we have men that are influencing direction in a society. And so when we don't have men with clean hearts, we get corrupted societies. And when men aren't taught how to be men, like our example of the Prophet ﷺ, who was a leader, who was a warrior, but was a soft-hearted, humble, beautiful man with upstanding character, then this is how we get all of the problems in the world, essentially. In a nutshell.
Tenemos muchos ejemplos en las diferentes tradiciones, pero por ejemplo tenemos en la era otomana lo que tenemos futuwwah guilds, que son como asociaciones de guilds.
Guilds,
clubs? I know what they are, but
Gremios.
Gremios futuwwah. Y son comunidades de jóvenes, normalmente jóvenes, varones, aunque también las mujeres necesitan desarrollar estos ritos de paso, Pero, ¿por qué hablamos de hombres? Porque en la estructura musulmana tradicional son los hombres los que influyen en la dirección de la sociedad externamente, ¿no? Entonces, si no tenemos hombres con corazones limpios, si no desarrollamos hombres, varones con corazones limpios, entonces la sociedad se acaba corrompida, ¿no? Si nos enseñamos a seguir el ejemplo del profeta, la pasea con él, de cómo ser hombre, ¿no? Que era un guerrero y que luchaba, pero también tenía un corazón muy dulce y muy suave, ¿no?
The reality is that the human being has this process of development, and it's worth investing in as a society. Even if we don't have young children ourselves, we as a community are reliant on the development of our society, and so we need to, as a community, we all have the responsibility of bringing up our young people in a way that it is nurturing their healthy development.
Entonces, el hecho es que, independientemente de si nosotros personalmente tenemos hijos o no, el proceso de desarrollo vale la pena invertir en nuestros jóvenes, porque los jóvenes, sean nuestros hijos o no, van a acabar configurando la sociedad que nos va a rodear y nos va a apoyar o no, ¿no? Entonces, y en la que nos vamos a apoyar nosotros. Por eso es importante invertir en el desarrollo de nuestros jóvenes, de los jóvenes de nuestra comunidad.
So I just want to point out some, as we, like I'm saying, we need to develop these things, and they would need to be developed for each society, which is going to be different because we all, and I don't mean society like let's say for instance in this particular community in Orgiva, the way that we would need to develop a process of futuwwah for young people would need to match what their life is like here, what resources they have, what are the needs of the community even. Because the way that this has always been, which we can learn from tradition, is that there are certain elements that have always been in place for these rites of passage for young people.
Entonces necesitamos, desarrollar para cada diferente sociedad cómo serían estos ritos de paso. Por ejemplo, pero sociedad tan concreto como por ejemplo aquí en Órgiva, ¿no? Para los jóvenes de Órgiva, la manera que se desarrolla se necesitaría tener en cuenta la situación real, cómo es su vida aquí, qué recursos tienes, cuáles son las necesidades que tienen, cuáles son las necesidades de la comunidad incluso, para poder desarrollar algo que para ellos tenga sentido.
So the basic, if we would boil this down to like 3 areas that there is essential for the development for this, for these rites of passage, are physical, contemplative, and creative. So physical, meaning there always has been and has to fundamentally be a physical discipline, physical training of the young person. And through that physical discipline, they're learning spiritual principles.
Entonces, hay 3 áreas fundamentales que hay que tener en cuenta siempre. El área física, el área contemplativa y el área creativa. El área física es el entrenamiento físico, ejercicio físico, y a través del cual van a aprender disciplina para desarrollarse, para desarrollar espiritualmente.
So the physical, we'll talk about that a bit first, is fundamental because we exist as physical beings and our souls exist in our bodies. So when the Prophet ﷺ told us to do archery and horse riding and swimming and wrestling, these are all specific aspects that align the body in alignment with its reality so it can be fully occupying the soul.
El aspecto físico es fundamental porque estamos en un cuerpo físico y nuestra alma está metida en un cuerpo físico, ¿no? Y por eso cuando el profeta pasa con él nos invitó o nos dijo de hacer tiro con arco, montar a caballo, lucha libre, nadar.
So these disciplines, so people call these sunnah sports, right? I think a better way to understand it is sunnah disciplines.
Le llaman esto a veces deportes sunnah, pero es mejor entenderlos como disciplinas sunnah.
Because we have a notion now of sports as something that's like lahu. So the concept of lahu in Arabic is like a frivolous pastime.
Porque ahora pensamos en los deportes como algo que llamamos lahu, que en árabe es algo como un pasatiempo frívolo.
So I know for a lot of people, football is not, they would be offended if you said it's a frivolous pastime, but it's not necessarily developing it can if one approaches it as a way of developing the entire human being, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, socially.
Sé que mucha gente, si le dice que el fútbol es algo frívolo, pues se molestarían, ¿no? Y de hecho puede no serlo si lo utilizas para desarrollarte psicológica, espiritualmente y éticamente.
But so first of all, these particular sunnah disciplines that the Prophet ﷺ prescribed have all specific, particular things that align our bodies with our souls. So archery, you're stretching your body, you're focused, you're in a state of, you have to be present in the moment, you have to be aligned with your spine, when you're stretching, you're opening meridians in the body. So this is not only aligning the channels of the body with the heart and the soul, it is also a healing and integration for trauma. So when the Prophet
You really have to be a lot slower.
lose my train of thought.
I know. So, estos deportes de Sunna que nos invitan tienen unas ciertas características. Por ejemplo, para ayudarnos a alinear el cuerpo y el alma, ¿no? Por ejemplo, en el tiro con arco, cuando te estiras, abres los meridianos, estás muy presente, tienes que estar alineando los canales y todo esto hace que tu corazón y tu alma se alineen.
So, the Prophet ﷺ, when they were on the battlefield, the warriors were on the battlefield and they were experiencing trauma. They had, they were seeing their brothers be killed right in front of them. And this is, we call this post-traumatic stress disorder. I just heard today, they're saying people in Philistine, they have present stress disorder, traumatic stress disorder, because it's not even post, right? They're constantly living it. And so the Prophet, ﷺ, when they came off the battlefield, he said, go practice archery. He wasn't saying go practice archery because you weren't good, you missed your shots and you lost. This was a way of healing the trauma.
Por ejemplo, el profeta, la pasea con él, sabemos que en las batallas los guerreros sufrían muchos impactos emocionales de ver a sus hermanos caer y muertos y heridos. Y entonces, lo que se llama ahora el PTS, Post-Traumatic Syndrome, el síndrome de estrés postraumático. Y ahora mismo hay gente que tiene ni siquiera postraumático, sino en el momento, ¿no? Tiene síndrome, no de cosas que pasaron, sino cosas que están pasando actualmente. Entonces, en el momento. Entonces, el profeta les enviaba, después de esto, ir a hacer tiro con arco. No porque practique para decir que malos estabas y tienes que mejorar, ¿no? Sino porque es una manera de realinear el cuerpo y el alma.
So these are fundamentally things that are not just physical, they're aligning our soul with reality and balancing our aqida in reality. Not aqida in a sense of relationship to thought and belief that is cognitive, but aqida in everything is, I'm submitted to Allah and everything is held with Allah's, in Allah's qadr, and I am in a state of surrender to that, versus we can experience something and be traumatized by it and be stuck in the disaggregation of that doesn't make sense with being in expansion and surrender, right? Because I'm now constricted from this difficult traumatic experience. And so we need things that are going to allow us to integrate.
Entonces estas cosas son fundamentales, no solo desde el punto de vista físico, sino que sirven como para equilibrar nuestra aqida, pero la aqida no lo que pensamos y los conceptos y las creencias, sino en nuestro momento ahora de cómo integramos lo que hacemos en nuestra relación con el presente y la realidad ahora mismo. Entonces es muy importante no quedarse enganchado con las ideas, sino traer esto a nuestra actualidad presente.
So, and all of the Sunnah disciplines have different aspects that align the human being in different ways. And I won't go into them in detail, but what I want to just underline here is that why this is so fundamental to the process of futuwwah, of the raising of young people and just human beings, is that it is a way of engaging the will and teaching these fundamental values of ethics and spiritual principles through the body, through the will, not just through the intellect.
Cada uno de estos deportes tiene características particulares para alinear el cuerpo y el alma, y no vamos a entrar en estos, pero ¿por qué están fundamentales? Es porque es una manera de comprometer y enganchar la voluntad, ¿no? A través de lo físico, aprender valores y ética.
So if you think of this as this horizontal relationship to life in this physical dimension that we're used to, we're used to just sort of seeing ourselves as separate beings on this physical dimension. So when we do physical activity, we see it as, okay, well, it's good for my health. It's going to be good for my heart, meaning the heart that pumps blood so I don't have a heart attack, not the spiritual metaphysical heart, right?
Si vemos esto desde el punto de vista, digamos, ahora mismo físico, estamos acostumbrados a vernos como personas separadas, independientes. Entonces, si hago ejercicio, pues pienso que me viene bien para el corazón físico, ¿no? que bombea la sangre.
So this orientation to just physicality is really influenced by a postmodern, a modern way of thinking that is about materialist and dualism. That I'm just this separate being, that I'm not interconnected and there's no spiritual reality that I exist in at the same time as my physical reality.
Esta manera de interpretarse es un pensamiento moderno que me hace sentirme separado de todo lo demás, de que no que yo sea una parte de todo lo que hay, sino que mi aspecto físico es una parte muy independiente de todo lo demás.
So engaging young people in physical training is not about just developing their muscles and developing their ability to get stress out. It is teaching them to be present in their full self. So we exist on this horizontal relationship. Let's say this is, from birth to death, what we talked about here, but we exist before. There's a prenatal existence and a post-mortem existence. But we tend to just focus on the physical realm.
Digamos que no es solo para desarrollar, cuando hablamos de los jóvenes que hagan estos ejercicios, sus músculos y para soltar el estrés, ¿no? Sino para desarrollarse a todo su ser, ¿no? Y ahora pensamos en nuestra vida aquí, ahí hemos visto aquí una rayita que es cuando nacemos tenemos vida antes, pero solo pensamos en la vida como lo que hay aquí entre estas dos rayas.
So we can focus on horizontal relationships with people, and we aren't necessarily incorporating the reality of the vertical relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Entonces podemos focalizar en las relaciones horizontales con otras personas, pero no nos focalizamos necesariamente en la relación vertical con Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
The reality is that we have in us the ruh and a nafs. So we have our physical manifestation of our soul, and we have the ruh that was breathed into us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that connects us directly to this spiritual reality.
La verdad es que tenemos en nosotros el ruh y el nafs, y tenemos en nuestro cuerpo el ruh enviado a nosotros por Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala y el nafs, y está todo esto dentro de nuestra realidad física.
So if you think that this is in this physical realm, there's this physical dimension of what we're used to, what we can see and touch, and what is material manifestation. But there's also a spiritual reality that exists in this same world. It's the ghaib, the unseen reality.
Pues podemos pensar esta parte aquí en la parte física, lo que vemos, lo que tocamos, nuestro cuerpo, en lo que vemos habitualmente, pero también en este mismo mundo existe otro ámbito espiritual que no vemos, el ghaib, lo que no está visto, lo no visto.
And the human being occupies both realms.
El ser humano ocupa ambos reinos, ambas áreas.
So you could say that this is our jism, our body.
Esto es el jism, nuestro cuerpo.
Where the jism intersects with the physical reality, this is our nafs.
Donde intersecta con la realidad física, esto es nuestro nafs.
Where our jism intersects with the spiritual reality, this is our ruh.
Donde nuestro cuerpo interactúa o no coincide con la realidad espiritual es nuestro roh.
So these aren't separate entities necessarily. You can think of them conceptually as separate, but we are one integral being. And the idea is that we have to come into integration so that we're fully physically present in this world and fully present to Allah in the spiritual reality, in the here and now.
Pues puedes pensar en esto como dos diferentes entidades, pero en realidad son una sola entidad y podemos pensar en que necesitamos unirlas, unificarlas para tener una
And the thing
realidad ahora mismo
that regulates our center of these balance of these two potentialities is the center of our being, which is our qalb.
en lo que regula la interacción entre estas dos potencialidades es el centro de nuestro ser, que es el qalb.
So our heart, the state of our heart, regulates our ability to either be fully just staying with our separateness and the dunya and blocked off to this spiritual reality. So this is how we can, when we stay with the separateness, our heart can get blocked and covered over.
Entonces el estado de nuestro corazón define si nosotros nos quedamos metidos en nuestra separación, nuestra ser diferentes, y en nuestro corazón en ese caso puede quedarse bloqueado.
This is how we can get corrupted hearts with then corrupted people and corrupted societies.
Así es como podemos obtener o alcanzar tener un corazón y una persona y unas sociedades corruptas.
So the whole process of futuwwah and tarbiyah is fundamentally cleaning the heart of the blockages from staying only with the physical separate dimension.
Entonces, todo el proceso de futuwwah es, en realidad, el tarbiyah es estar limpiando el corazón de todo lo que nos bloquea y nos separa de habernos mantenido solo en la dimensión física.
And this comes when we only identify ourselves with the nafs.
Y esto se produce cuando nos identificamos exclusivamente con el nafs.
So today we have ourselves are influenced by this, but for certain our children are influenced by this. We have this culture of ana, of I. And everybody is trying to identify themselves. My identity, right? We have all this identity politics and fluid identity and changing identity.
Estamos nosotros influidos, obviamente, por esto, pero también nuestros hijos, nuestros jóvenes están influidos por esto, porque estamos en la cultura del ana, de yo, ¿no? Nuestra identidad, cuál es mi identidad, políticas identitarias, la identidad fluida.
And so this starts to break down the fabric of our society because it's breaking down the fabric of our deen, of how we stay fundamentally balanced and present to our state of ubudiyah, of being servants of Allah.
Y esto es lo que está descomponiendo la fábrica de nuestra sociedad y los fundamentos de nuestro propio ser, ¿no? De cómo podemos estar siempre presentes en nuestro ubudiyah, nuestro ser sirvientes de Allah.
So all of this process is about the development of the human being to clean the heart. But we have to fundamentally do this in physicality, physical processes, because we are our bodies are dense manifestations of our soul.
Y todo este trabajo es de limpiar nuestro corazón y desarrollarnos como seres humanos, pero tenemos que hacerlo a través de la fisicalidad, porque nuestro cuerpo es como la parte, interpretación densa de nuestro alma.
So I just want to end with some examples. I want to finish these other three things. That was the physical. And the contemplative aspect is there was always an understanding of teaching the young person how to be present with Allah. And that is partially facilitated by the integration of physical and spiritual. So through these physical practices, it allows the person to come into being able to be present and still in the self.
Y luego vamos a volver los otros dos que quedaban. Con el aspecto contemplativo se ha enseñado cómo estar presente con Allah, es lo que queremos enseñar a los niños, y esto se puede enseñar también a través de las cualidades físicas que se van desarrollando para que sea capaz de estar presente.
So contemplation is partially about using your intellect to contemplate on Allah's creation, but then it is moving into a heart-centered contemplation. So you're being present in the heart, in a state of hudur. And what cultivating this place and this state of hudur is allowing the person to come into integration and come into actually being a Muslim, being in a state of Islam.
Entonces, aunque el aspecto contemplativo es parcialmente el intelecto, contemplar, ponerse en contemplación, también necesita integrar todo y ayudarle a entrar en el estado de hudur y hacer aceptar y vivir su Islam.
And so now, because we live such disaggregated lives that are sedentary and removed from nature and fitri lifestyles, I wind up having to spend a lot of time teaching people how to breathe and teaching people how to be in their body.
Y debido a la vida tan desagregada que vivimos y tan pasiva, resulta que muchas veces tengo que enseñar a la gente cómo respirar y cómo estar en su cuerpo.
But if you ride a horse, or you wrestle, or you do archery, or you do swimming, you don't need to learn how to breathe. Because you cannot fundamentally do these things without naturally being connected to breath.
Pero si montas a caballo o haces lucha libre o tiras con arco, no tienes que aprender a respirar porque es imposible hacer estas cosas sin respirar correctamente.
So if anybody's ever ridden a horse, if you're riding a horse, you have to be fully present in the moment. You have to be connected to your breath because you're aligning your breath with your body and the horse and it's rhythmic. You have to be fully aware to the present moment because if you don't, you're going to fall off the horse or you're going to get in trouble. And you're connecting your heart to this other being. So it aligns all these things to the point where somebody is naturally connected with their body, connected with their breath, and in a state of presence.
Y por ejemplo, si montas a caballo, pues tienes que controlar tu aliento y tienes que estar también en el ritmo que estás moviendo y estás conectado con otro ser y muy presente en lo que está ocurriendo a tu alrededor, ¿no? Y esto integra todo en una manera de estar.
So imagine, these rites of passage of learning how to do these physical activities is fundamentally embedding the way of teaching how to be a Muslim in the both Sharia and Haqiqa way of really fully being a full upstanding human being with perfected character.
Entonces, estos ritos del paso en realidad es una manera fundamental de enseñar cómo ser un musulmán, cómo desarrollar el carácter perfeccionado.
So now the third thing is where the refinement of character comes in, tahdib al-akhlaq, and this comes through the refinement of a craft.
Entonces, el punto número 3 que hemos hablado que era creativo es a través de el refinar y acabar de afinar el carácter se hace a través de un artesano, un oficio, aprender algo artesanal.
So in these futuwwah guilds, they always had, the young person was supposed to dedicate themselves to learning a craft and being an apprentice with a master.
Y en estos gremios de futuwwah, el joven se tendría que dedicar a aprender un oficio y a servir a un maestro y aprender un maestro.
So there's a number of mechanisms that are happening with this craft, with this. So we talk about creative, it's a creative process, but the creative that we're talking about is not just sort of the nafs expressing itself and glorifying itself. It is the nafs disciplining itself and falling in line with natural order, which allows for the true beauty to come forth. The beauty that is defined by Allah's fitra, the fitra of the natural world through Allah's jamal.
Entonces, esta creatividad del oficio no es el nafs que se hace creativo y se expresa a sí mismo, sino es cómo disciplinas tu nafs para entrar en el arte y aprender la fitra y la belleza de Allah en el camino.
So this could be anything from learning calligraphy to learning how to make bows and arrows. It could be blacksmithing. It could be a number of things, all things that are needed by society, right? So these societies, these people would be learning crafts that also feed into the physical, social needs of a society, along with the moral character that is needed in the society.
Entonces puede ser, por ejemplo, aprender caligrafía o a ser herrero perdón, o cualquier cosa que la sociedad necesite, ¿no? Y esto a su vez alimenta el aspecto físico de lo que es necesario por la sociedad.
And so there's a number of things, but two fundamental psychological principles or mechanisms that are happening with this is that the person is learning to control something that is in their hands to control with their will. So it's small things that you can do that, let's say I can turn a piece of raw wood into a really beautiful bow that has a purpose, right? The process of doing that aligns my will with a locus of control that is realistic to what is in my control.
Entonces hay dos mecanismos que están funcionando aquí. Uno de ellos es que estás aprendiendo a controlar algo que está en tu mano controlar. Por ejemplo, el que coge una pieza de madera y lo convierte en un arco que tiene un objetivo y una función.
So we as contemporary people especially, we spend a lot of time focused on what's not in our control. We're constantly looking to the future. People are telling you have to have a 5 to 10 year plan, and you're trying to control things that are outside of your locus of control, right? So which is anything other than what's inside of you and basically as far as you can reach or grab or step, even just one step. So your thoughts, your feelings, your intentions, and your state, the state of your heart, and what you can literally do here.
En la sociedad moderna nos estamos focalizando mucho en lo que no podemos controlar, ¿no? En las cosas que están completamente fuera de nuestro control. Se supone que tenemos que tener un plan a 5 años, a 10 años y cosas que es que no podemos controlar, ¿no? Están completamente fuera de nuestra voluntad, ¿no? Y entonces de esta manera se aprende, aunque sea cosas que estén a un paso de que puedas hacer aquí, que puedas mover, que puedas tocar o que puedas construir, algo que puedas hacer concretamente.
So when we spend a lot of time in regretting the past, then we get stuck in regret and we get stuck in depression. When we spend a lot of time in the future being worried about what's going to happen, we get anxiety, right? We get panic attacks. We get off kilter because we're trying to busy ourselves with things that are outside of our control. And so what happens is we wind up spiraling out of control.
Entonces pasamos mucho tiempo arrepintiéndonos de cosas que han pasado en el pasado, acabamos con tendencia hacia la depresión. Si pasamos mucho tiempo preocupándonos de qué puede pasar en el futuro, entonces desarrollamos como ansiedad, ¿no? Y empezamos a hacer una especie de espiral que nos saca fuera de control.
So focusing on a craft is teaching the will on a fundamental experiential level to deal with what is in your locus of control, which is essentially an embodied aqida, right? Because we all, as modern individuals and Muslims, we have this belief that everything is qadar Allah. Allah is qadar and qadar. We believe that Allah is in control of everything. Yet we get stuck on understanding, well, where does my will come into that? My free will versus Allah's will. And what we have a really hard time doing is embracing paradox. And the embracing of paradox means we're living exactly in the center of both of these two realities. And this process of this refining of a craft brings that into teaching on a soul discipline level.
Entonces, estos oficios lo que hacen, enseñan y desarrollan la voluntad, ¿no? De poder tratar con lo que sí puedes hacer algo concretamente. Es una especie de corporeizar nuestra aqida, ¿no? Porque todos sabemos que todo viene de Allah, el aqida de Allah, pero luego, por otro lado, nos pensamos, entonces, ¿dónde está mi voluntad, ¿no? Entonces, este equilibrio entre la voluntad de Allah y lo que uno puede hacer es una especie de paradoja y necesitamos abrazar y aceptar esta paradoja. Y cuando hacemos esto, nos encontramos justo en el punto del qalb.
And then the last thing I'll say about this, which is important, and then we'll wrap it up because I think I've been talking too long, or we've been talking too long, is that the fundamental aspect of this craft is the master-student relationship, the master-apprentice relationship.
Y lo último que diré sobre esto, y porque creo que llevamos mucho tiempo hablando, es que el aspecto fundamental de este oficio es la relación entre el maestro y el aprendiz.
Because in this process of student and master, the student learns to give over themselves, to submit their nafs.
En este proceso de la relación del maestro y el estudiante, el aprendiz aprende a entregar su nafs al maestro.
And we have a big problem with this when we think of this, because it's, oh, well, then aren't you submitting to another human being, right? And we get scared of this because we know lots of corrupted human beings that abuse, spiritual abuse relationships because of this. And so it is a problem, and it is something, but it's a problem that feeds back on not having clean hearts and not having these rites of passage in place, right? So this is why we have this problem so much now, is because the people we have put in leadership were not a part of this futuwwah process.
Entonces, claro, esto nos hace pensar, bueno, pero eso de someterse es como someterse a otro ser humano con todos los abusos que hay, que están saliendo, ¿no? Y efectivamente esto viene porque la gente que hemos puesto en lugares de liderazgo y que están a cargo de esto no pasaron por el proceso de desarrollo sano de un corazón limpio.
But let's just say, for argument's sake, we have these things in place. Then the mechanism that's happening is that it allows the person to get outside themselves, and in the submission to the master, there is a possibility of transmission that happens. So that we're not just talking about learning through cognition and skill. You teach me to do this, and I study and I study and I study and I learn to do this. Yes, that's a part of it, but in the annihilation of the nafs, of the giving over and the submission, the master becomes a stand-in for the person submitting to Allah, and then the illumination can happen, where the transmission of knowledge is actually heart to heart.
Entonces, esto puede ocurrir, es cierto, pero vamos a imaginarnos que la gente que está en su lugar son las personas adecuadas. Entonces, en este someterse del alma, se puede producir una transmisión. Es decir, no solamente es el conocimiento cognitivo que se aprende, yo he aprendido a hacer esto, sino que hay una transmisión, de tal manera que al someterse el nafs es una especie de sustituto, o aprender a someterse a Allah del alma.
And we think of this relationship usually in the sheikh-murid relationship, where there's a sheikh who has religious knowledge and spiritual knowledge and has, is at these different high stations in this sense. But in reality, this can also happen just within the craft. When a person gives themselves over to a craft, what happens, and there's studies about this, I was mentioning this other day, about this concept of flow. And that they've done all this research that they understand when somebody is fully giving themselves over to a craft and refining their skill, but then through the refining of their skill, there's something that happens where they let go of themselves and they give themselves over fully to the practice or the craft, and they're essentially in a state of what we would call fana, annihilation of the self. And what's happening is they're moving into a place where they're just transmitting, and this is why we find incredible things from human beings that are doing, either creating enormous beauty or doing feats that we can't even explain, that shouldn't be humanly possible.
Solemos pensar en entregarse de un ser humano a otro, en la relación que hay entre un sheikh y un murid. El sheikh tiene conocimiento espiritual y de vida, pero esto también puede pasar dentro del aprendizaje de un oficio. Y cuando una persona se entrega a su oficio, ocurre algo que he estado comentando antes, se llama flow, y es como cuando estás refinando tu habilidad y tu desarrollo de tu oficio, es como que te dejas ir y entras en algo que era similar a lo que llamaríamos los musulmanes faná, ¿no? Que te llegas a un punto, un lugar en el que puedes estar produciendo o verdaderas cosas bellas o monumentos bellos o incluso acciones que parecen increíbles que una persona puede conseguir.
But even at a smaller level, and this can be multiple relationships, especially if we're talking about the young person having mentoring relationships with different people in a community. This is how these rites of passages get passed on, is that they're teaching these fundamental principles, but teaching them through a process of different skill sets. And they may have a number of different mentors within the community, uncles, different people who are taking care of them and teaching them a skill, but also teaching them different angles of wisdom through their own experience, but that they have learned within their cultural context, that are related to Islamic principles, that are relevant to the current reality of where they're living.
Y en un nivel más digamos, reducido, se puede tener, por ejemplo, para los jóvenes, diferentes tipos de relaciones de mentoring, que se llama ahora, o para estos ritos de paso, ¿no? Puede ser diferente gente en la comunidad, otros adultos, tíos, o diferentes personas, ¿no? Que les enseñan diferentes habilidades, sabidurías, y cómo relacionar esto que están aprendiendo al Islam, con el Islam y a la sociedad en la que están viviendo actualmente.
So then the ideal is that in 14 to 21 they would be now being trained to become a mentor for other people. So that what you're doing is leading them in to be independent adults in society. What you don't do is just sort of cut it off there or cut it off there. It's a befriending them in this stage means that you're giving them responsibility, you're giving them independence, and you're teaching them how they can now eventually be the mentors and the masters.
Entonces, cuando llegamos a este momento, no los dejamos solos, sino que aquí les estamos enseñando cómo ellos pueden, a su vez, convertirse en mentores y profesores para otros, ¿no? No los dejamos así solos, que se convierten en adultos, en responsables y que empiecen a formar parte de la sociedad. ¿Sí?
So it's like a side by side, almost like you're giving them independence to do something and responsibility, but you're still there, making sure that they're within the fold, because they're not yet ready to be on their own. And so what it's doing, it's ensuring that this process gets passed on. So this is what rites of passage is. It's how we can do it within an Islamic framework. And I would just end with impressing upon it. It is fundamentally important to the point where it's a large part of why we are in a crisis in these times. So it's really important work that we, as a collective, figure out how we can implement these things in our communities. Inshallah.
Entonces, esta última parte los acompañamos ya un poco más como amigos de lado a lado, ayudándoles a ellos empezar poco a poco a convertirse en mentores y guías para otros, pero todavía acompañándolos porque no están preparados para hacerlo individualmente. Y quería terminar diciendo que en realidad esto es muy importante para nuestra comunidad y es el motivo por el cual estamos en esta crisis actualmente y que necesitamos buscar una manera de incorporar estos ritos de paso a nuestra sociedad. Inshallah.
Amén.
Thank you so much, Sidi. Beautiful.
Gracias.
We jump into questions?
I think so, yeah. I think it's
a lot of them
Yeah.
already.
Any questions? ¿Hay preguntas?
Sí. I just had a question around the difference between, so in a woman's life we have initiatic phases, like menstruation, onset, birth, child rearing, menopause, these, and then going into decline. What's the difference? So you talk about rites of passage. I mean, I've always conceptualized them as initiatic phases of transition. I'm just, is it to do with is the rites of passage how we handle them, as opposed to it being a naturally initiatic process?
Pregunta a la hermana que con las mujeres el tema de los ritos de paso y los aspectos iniciáticos, por ejemplo, que ya tiene la mujer naturalmente, como el inicio de la menstruación, el tener hijos, la menopausia, etcétera. ¿Qué diferencia hay entre estos dos y si esto es algo integrado, natural, ¿no? En el proceso de las mujeres.
So yeah, it's an initiatic process, but ideally and in reality, everything that has a physical manifestation has a deeper spiritual meaning. And so we often forget the deeper spiritual meaning or are in ghafla and forgetfulness of it, and we orient to these things as just rituals, right? And even we orient to our fara'id in this way. The obligatory acts of worship, we can see them as just rituals, right? They're just physical, transactional things that we're supposed to do. And oftentimes, these rites of passage can become that. And everything that has a physical manifestation has a reflection in the spiritual reality. And so the whole point of the custom or the ritual is to mark in a significance in this spiritual transition, this spiritual transformation.
Todos los acontecimientos físicos, todos los aspectos físicos tienen en realidad un aspecto y una conexión con lo espiritual, aunque a veces estamos un poco en ghafla, en olvido de esto, ¿no? Y nos olvidamos. Incluso en nuestros partes que rezamos, pues es solo un ritual, es solo un ritual. Entonces necesitamos recordar que todo aspecto físico tiene un reflejo en lo espiritual. Y que esto lo que hace es que nos hace recordar y conectar lo físico con lo espiritual, lo está activando.
There may be something in what you're asking.
I guess I'm struggling to understand whether, because my concept prior to this evening of a rite passage is something, a sort of a staged, ritualized process, right? Like you set up something like, I don't know, rite of passage for men to go to the woods, they spend the night, they make a fire and they kind of come into manhood. You know, in tribal culture, I mean, you know, whatever. In tribal cultures, they have a lot of these kind of sort of staged, like created rites of passage. I guess I'm struggling to understand for a woman who goes through natural, physiological kind of rites of passages. I know men do as well, just from my perspective. Just the understanding the difference between, because you're talking about what I conceive of as initiatic processes, as rites of passage. Or is it how we handle them culturally that differentiates it from initiation to a rite of passage, or are they the same thing? Yeah, essentially.
I think the cultural activity is a marker of the process of the process in reality.
So how we handle it.
Yeah.
Pues preguntaba la hermana, lo que quería decir es la diferencia entre algo que, por ejemplo, que antes los ritos de paso, tal y como ella los recordaba, o que dice lo que recuerda, pues por ejemplo, pues las tribus que cogían a los jóvenes, hacían, yo que sé, pasar una noche en el bosque o alguna cosa así, que se está como organizado y lo montaban, y comparado con pues algo como que empieza la menstruación o tienes un hijo, que es algo que es como natural, ¿no? Y cuál era la diferencia. Y que ha dicho el doctor que lo que hace es una cosa, marca, ¿no? Los ritos de paso marcan momentos iniciáticos, como una marca. Una señal.
Jazakallah khairan for your presentation. I only have a quick question. It was related to aql on your right diagram. You did not mention it, and I was wondering whether is there a relation with the qalb, or is there no importance, or what's the situation with the aql?
I just only had so much time, and it can get complicated. Oh, you need to ask the. I mean,
la hermana ha preguntado solamente una pregunta sobre el aql que ha visto que preguntaba qué relación tiene con el qalb o si no era importante, y contesta por eso que es que no hay mucho tiempo tampoco.
Yeah, so aql is very important, but it's complicated because we have a very twisted relationship with it, because we are completely, as modern people, oriented in intellect, and our understanding of ourself is our thoughts, and this is all very foreign to an Islamic paradigm. It's a Cartesian dualism, and so aql has different realities. There's different levels of aql. The word aql is not even used in the Quran. It's yaqiluna, which is an active intellecting or perceiving, and it's used as a faculty of the heart. Allah talks about, do they not have hearts with which they perceive? So the deeper reality of aql is the ability of the heart to see things as they are, to perceive reality. we also have rational capacity and our rational intellect, which we need, right? We need to learn the Quran so that we can change our actions and accordingly and align it. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is use the rational faculty to then lead us to this illumination of the heart, to open the heart's ability to see clearly.
El aql es muy importante porque tenemos una relación muy tergiversada con nosotros mismos y con nuestro intelecto, ¿no? Y tenemos, hay diferentes niveles del aql y finalmente lo que se busca es un corazón que perciba la realidad tal y como es, ¿no? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, en el Corán no se utiliza la palabra aql, ¿no? Pero es desarrollarse, es decir, nosotros tenemos que utilizar el intelecto para aprender cosas, aprender el Corán, por ejemplo, aprender árabe, y necesitamos acabar por desarrollar la manera de percibir la realidad en nuestro corazón. Sounds good to you.
So thank you so much for this talk. I'm quite a realist, so sometimes I struggle with ideals a little bit. And looking at the model, I think it's very insightful, and I'm just looking around the room and we're all in the adulthood phase, inshallah. So for the people in the room who haven't gone through this beautiful journey of 0 to 21, let's say, are we all doomed?
What? Doomed?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there
No.
hope? Of course there is, but I'd love to hear from you
Yeah.
how
All
this awareness is coming so late in life. And
Yeah.
obviously it's great for the young people in our lives, inshallah, who we are, hopefully going to pass this on to, but how do we deal with this situation?
Pregunta a la hermana que, bueno, muchas gracias por la charla y que es una persona realist, you said you were a realist?
Yes.
Que es muy realista, entonces que ha mirado el gráfico, le parece muy perceptivo, pero que ha mirado en la habitación, aquí en la sala, y ve que somos todos adultos y que ninguno de ellos hemos pasado por este proceso, aparentemente. Entonces, pregunta si estamos todos condenados por haber pasado por ahí.
Yeah, no, there's definitely hope, and all the same principles still apply. It just happens we are framing it this because the topic was rites of passage, but we could talk about this just as healing, right? And why it would be healing is because if we don't go through this healthy process, healthy develop early on, where our hearts are, fundamentally seeped in a healthy development, then we have blockages and crust on our hearts and things that we need to go in and fix and heal so that we can make up for the fact that this process didn't happen for us, right? So, two things. One is, yes, we need to fundamentally heal the corrupted or hurt or broken hearts of adults, because currently the adults are leading the world, right? And that's the same process. Like, so horse riding, archery, swimming, still relevant. You still have to fundamentally come into your body. And for most of us, we're hurt, and when we're hurt, we constrict, and we're in qabd, we're in constriction, and we're living in these disaggregated, unfitry lifestyles which don't help us reintegrate. So we can have hurt, you can have trauma, but if you're doing archery after the trauma, if you're walking in the woods all the time, if you're riding a horse, if you're fundamentally connected to your body and your breath, the trauma is not going to accumulate and be so impossible to function with, right? So most people who are hurt and are holding this are literally disassociated from their body. So if I were to ask somebody to breathe and come into their body who has had a traumatic, they won't even be able to, right? And then they'll say, well, I can't, and I don't want to, but we fundamentally have to in order to heal. So it's possible. It's a process. It's what I spend most of my time doing, is working with adults, not youth. I used to work more with youth, but I should probably go back to that.
Dice que no estamos condenados, afortunadamente, y que hay esperanza y que son los mismos principios, en realidad los mismos principios. En lugar de desarrollo hablamos de sanación, por ejemplo, ¿no? Entonces, si no hemos tenido ese desarrollo sano, acabaremos teniendo bloqueos en el corazón y necesitamos arreglarlos y sanar esto. Entonces, por un lado, si tenemos somos adultos con corazones rotos y estamos en el mundo y son los adultos los que dirigen el mundo, pero si además tenemos vidas que nos están apartando de nuestro cuerpo, donde no hacemos ejercicio, no nos movemos, somos sedentarios, pues esto es lo que hace el problema. Si tenemos trauma, tenemos dificultades, pero practicamos tiro con arco, montamos a caballo, o nadamos, etc., entonces el trauma no se acumula, no se acumula. Entonces, la mayor parte de la gente con la que él trabaja, si trabaja con adultos sobre todo, dice, les pides que respiren para que se meten en su cuerpo y les resulta totalmente imposible. Y es el mismo proceso que hay que seguir.
Okay,
There's a question here that you cannot see.
there's like several hands pointing to this one hand.
Sorry.
The invisible questioner.
Given the current state of the world at the moment, what would be the one skill set that you think is most important for us to learn to implement?
Dada la situación del mundo actual, ¿cuál es la habilidad o conjunto de habilidades que piensas que sería más importante desarrollar?
Breathing.
Respirar.
So we have Sidi Abdallah here. So you're going to keep him very busy. He's got appointments all day long. Honestly, like breathing, we have forgotten how to breathe.
Nos hemos olvidado cómo respirar.
And so it's not that complicated, honestly. Like, you don't have to learn complicated breathing exercises. And I haven't studied with Sidi Abdullah, but from what I understand, I think we're aligned in this, is that it's a natural reality of natural being in your body. And so you could learn, we need to learn to breathe, but also if you were to switch your life a little bit and just spend more time in moving slowly and doing things in tune with natural cycles and having your hands in the dirt and your feet on the ground and looking at green often, and your breath will respond. It will follow. You will, when you spend time looking at wind going through trees, your chest just opens and responds to that same rhythm. So the skill set is ironically like disengaging from modernity.
Sí, respirar, como has dicho, es importante. Pero no solo respirar, sino también hacer y no hace falta para respirar, no hace falta aprender ejercicios complejos de respiración, has dicho, Abdullah Tawfiq parece que también piensa lo mismo. Y también hacer un cambio en tu vida, ¿no? Ir a hacer las cosas un poquito más lentamente, acercarte un poco más a los ciclos naturales, que tus manos y tus pies se manchen de tierra y de barro, mirar más a plantas y a lo verde, ¿no? Si observas el viento como pasa a través de los árboles, vas a empezar a respirar naturalmente. Y realmente la verdadera habilidad que hemos de desarrollar es desconectarnos de la modernidad.
Estoy un poco sorprendido porque yo estos gráficos ya los he visto hace ya algunos años. Para introducir un poco mi experiencia, hace un siglo la sociedad inglesa, creo que aquí hay muchos ingleses, se planteó este mismo problema. Una vez que vivían todos en ciudades, se preocuparon por la educación de su juventud y cómo hacer una juventud sana en contacto con la naturaleza y hacer buenos ciudadanos y buenos líderes. Yo he estudiado sobre el tema y soy consciente de que ellos estudiaron la futuwwah islámica y acabaron con Baden-Powell haciendo los Boy Scouts. Yo he sido Boy Scout y estos gráficos los he visto. Yo he sido Boy Scout desde los 13 hasta los 22 años, justo en el Rito de Paso. He salido al campo, he tirado con arco, he aprendido oficios manuales. Mi pregunta, hombre, no ha habido en los talleres y cursillos que doy significaciones trascendentales de lo que estábamos haciendo, pero mi pregunta es, a la hora de realizar este proyecto, ¿qué diferencia habría entre algo nuevo o hacer un grupo scout islámico en Ojima? Porque la solución es
Okay, so he says he's very surprised because he already saw these graphs previously at some point, and so he about 100 years ago, a century ago, the the British people already posed themselves this very question: how to develop healthy youth into adults, you know. So they took them to something that would make great leaders, bring them closer to nature, etc. And he says that he knows that they studied Islamic futuwwah, he did, and they ended up eventually with the Boy Scouts in Baden-Powell. Okay. And he said that he was a Boy Scout from very young, and he went out to the country, and he practiced archery, and he learned all kinds of skills, etc., etc. However, there was never any transcendental meaning attached to any of this. So his question is, what is the difference now? I mean, if we develop like a new system, or if we just make like a Muslim Boy Scout group here in North
Yeah. Well, first of all, I highly doubt they were using this model with the spiritual reality, because it sounds like you're saying it wasn't part of it, right? And the aqida being an integral part of somebody's lifespan. So yes, I mean, it has to be integrated into the process, because you can do anything. You can, we know that Allah has given us the deen of Islam as the path for life. But you can do all of the obligatory acts exactly as you're supposed to. Wear your clothes in the right way, make wudu perfectly, pray exactly as you're supposed to, and still have a corrupted heart. I know many people like this. They have their sharia is perfect. The haqiqah is absent. So it's not, there has to be at least a humility and an opening and an awareness of the spiritual dimension for you to fully benefit from the physical
I
things.
think that there was something wrong about or in the translation, but what I meant is that in the workshops that I was, there was no transcendental words or relationship between what we were doing with the boys and a spiritual schema or
Right.
whatever. But there is an spiritual path or meaning or experience within the Boy Scout group. And religion is always present. So my question is, in order to implement this futuwwah here in Ojima, should we take the British solution forming an Islamic, and it can be done, an Islamic Boy Scout group here? Once we have the solution already done and it's working, or should we try another thing?
I think there's no one answer. You should do what is going to work best for your community. And if we could say, well, the ideal, like she's a realist, we need to be realists. If we say the ideal is, yes, we create our own system. But then if we just sit around having talks about it and it never happens, then it's not helpful. If you can more quickly and more realistically use a model that already exists and get it moving, then this is going to benefit more people. So it's better. And then maybe as you go, you realize, okay, well, now we have experience doing this. Some of this is working, but we're seeing there's some missing links, and we either refine it or we realize, okay, while this is still moving, we actually need to build something from the ground up. But there is no one way in Islam. There is multiple right answers, as long as the principles are foundational.
Sorry, just to comment on that it also, it's not so fashionable now, Boy Scouts, as it used to be.
Ah.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
so
so
it's not very cool. It's not very cool,
Yeah.
you know.
It has to be cool for young people to buy into it, right?
Sí, entonces lo que dice el doctor es que la pregunta es entonces ¿cuál es la solución? ¿O qué hacer? ¿No? Si hacer un grupo de Boy Scouts musulmanes aquí o no. Y dice que pues lo que funcione, porque podemos decir, no, mire, queremos montar algo tal, y pasarnos meses y años hablando de algo y no llegar a hacer nada. O podemos empezar algo que funciona en parte o suficientemente y conforme sobre la marcha vamos viendo cómo va, pues ajustar o incluso decir, mientras esto funciona hay que desarrollar otra cosa. Pero es muy importante que sea algo que funcione y que podamos poner en marcha. Y decía luego Sidiani que también tiene que ser algo cool, porque si no los jóvenes no van a querer hacerlo.
I would just slightly disagree with Ali because I think that if you get children and they are still in a pure state, then you introduce them to skills. Knot tying example was the one that I remember learning most, and these kind of things that were actually really amazingly detailed. Learning to tie these knots that would have all these different uses and functions for different things. And those kind of skills that were taught, you don't necessarily have to, they feel cool learning them. Even I've done it now with children. You know, there's something that really connects with the heart of the children, connects with them, and they forget about needing to be cool with them.
So it may just be the uniforms.
It needs
You still do the same things, just get rid of the uniforms.
yes.
Or change the uniform.
There's someone
I don't know.
Can I bounce on this real quick?
Yeah.
Can I bounce on this
Yeah,
real
yeah.
quick? So, I went to the Muslim youth camp in Chicago for, it was a youth camp that happened like only 1 week in the summer, but it was something that I went consistently for like 8 years, so I was like a camper for 4 years and a counselor for 4 years. But it was really cool. We had a different brothers one, a different sisters one, and we had archery, we had hiking, we had canoeing, we had swimming, and in the same time we also had like prayer and dhikr and connection. So looking at this, I'm just like, wow, mashallah, I'm glad I went. Because that was during that time, 14 to 21.
Yeah.
But that could be an idea, and it was organized through the Muslim Community Center in Chicago, which is pretty old.
Yeah.
Masjid in
I
Chicago.
mean, and some of these things are just fundamental. Like literally just taking young people out into the woods can be transformative, even if there isn't underlying philosophical, spiritual, transformational perspective.
Nos decía la hermana que había estado yendo en Chicago a un campamento de jóvenes durante 8 años, 4 años como participante, como niña, y luego ayudando de monitora, que no solamente una semana, pero que hacía todo esto, había para niños y para niñas, y que hacía pues en canoa y montar a caballo, tirar con arco, y que se alegra mucho haberlo hecho. Y nos dice que efectivamente que simplemente sacar a los jóvenes al campo ya puede hacer algo, no tiene por qué siempre tener un significado espiritual obvio, ¿no? Que eso, simplemente llevar a los jóvenes al campo, eso ya es una ayuda.
Dr. Rothman, thank you for an amazing lecture, but today the world is in crisis, and we know that from financial, economic, so many things, yeah? So my question to you is, and this is no doubt from a corrupt heart, whether it's Muslim or non-Muslim world, yeah? What happens if they don't do the rite of passage to humanity?
La pregunta, está ahora el mundo en un momento de crisis económica, crisis de todo tipo, ¿no? Y preguntando desde un corazón que no está sano, corrupto, ¿qué pasaría ahora mismo si no hacen estos ritos de paso?
I mean, I think we just have to look around.
No tenemos que mirar a nuestro alrededor.
So basically, a total collapse.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I really feel it's too late.
No, it's never too late. Even on the day of judgment, when the world is crumbling, if we're planting a tree, we keep planting.
Absolutely, but you may have a total collapse for something to rise again.
Sure, yeah.
This is my point.
Maybe. But we don't wait. We never wait.
We never wait. I'm not saying wait. Everybody should do his capability, but
Yeah. No, but I mean, this is this is where we're at, and it is fundamentally at the heart of why we're where we are. And we can't save the whole world, but we have to start. They say think globally, act locally, and all of these things we're always local. Like so we can. So when I've been working on this project of developing a framework for Islamic rites of passage, but what that means is it would be a framework based on Islamic principles, based on a lot of things we just talked about, but then it would be a template that then has to be adapted to each local region. It would not look the same. It would be adapted to what makes sense for each specific community locally. But you can take the framework and the principles and the guidance that people need that we have gotten so disconnected from and lost, and unfortunately a lot of our scholars are very disconnected from this aspect of futuwwah and tarbiyah because they're stuck on just rational thought, even within our tradition. And so we need to build this as a framework, but then implement it and help people adapt it to their local context.
Let's let
Yes.
Dr. Abdallah rest.
I'm okay.
We should realistically maybe consider one or two more questions.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's such a beautiful topic and we're all inspired, but we also need to
Estamos ya
digest.
en una o dos últimas preguntas y
Who has a burning question? Okay.
Que si aconseja que dejemos los niños en la escuela pública.
She advises to take our children to public school. Public school, yeah.
Yeah. We're saying, what is my thoughts on children going to
you
public school?
Advise us, yeah.
I mean, my kids go to public school. It's not great, and I have 3 children, and for some of them it's better than others. We've moved them around based on their different mizaj, their different personality and what they need, but it takes a lot of supplemental development from the parents. So if you have access to a private school that has a different educational system, then good, better. But for many people that's not a realistic option, right? And it's expensive. So what that means is, what we do is we put them in public schools. We were selective about what public schools, if we can. Well, actually, that's not true. Where I live, it's all private schools, but you don't have a choice. But it's not an Islamically embedded school that's teaching our morals and ethics necessarily. But we have to supplement that. So I've spent a lot of time with my kids, helping them make sense of what they're getting in the world. So I watch movies with them. Rather than saying, no, you can't watch this, I know they're going to go get exposed to it elsewhere. So I sit and I watch it with them and I pause it in the middle and I say, what do you think about this? How do you make sense of that based on our value system? Rather than saying, haram, you can't see that. Like, oh, well, what do you think about that? So you want to, public schools tend to teach people what to think. We need to teach kids how to think. But even if we don't want the public schools necessarily to teach them how to think, because they're going to be teaching them how to think from a very different paradigm. So we're going to need to do a lot more work supplementing that. Ideally in a community is when you have a shared value system and you build a school system based on that. But like you said, we don't always have these ideals. I am working on that project though.
Después de 14, si vayan a aprender un oficio o seguir el bachillerato.
Yeah, so she's going to, same question saying after the 14 is it better if they go like for professional craft or learn something manual or go on to study university?
It depends on the mizaj of the child. I have one daughter who is just extremely intellectual. We've never told her to even do her homework. We don't really care about academics that much. And she does it all the time. She's just very smart. So it would be detrimental to her and what Allah has given her if we didn't nurture that. So we're going to help her go to university because she fundamentally wants to. But I have another child who struggles so much just to even keep up, and they're way behind, but they have other qualities that are beautiful, so we're nurturing those. I don't care, I don't need for them to go to university. I would rather that they have upstanding character. There's lots of other ways to, there's nothing wrong with being a humble, labor. Most of the awliya, if we read about, they were coffee sellers, they were carpenters, they don't need to have a university. Matter of fact, most of the problem with, is unlearning what people have learned in universities. We're too intellectualized. Most of the people that I have to teach them how to be, teach them how to breathe, it's because they go to university.
I think she understands the answer.
Okay. Oh, she's nodding. But I think other people want the. No. Question.
Es que se lo ha entendido perfectamente.
Perfecto.
Me gustaría agradecer al doctor Abdallah Rothman porque nos trae con una brisa fresca, con frescor, nos trae una tradición milenaria, en este caso en el Islam, y por supuesto añadiendo este gráfico de aquí, lo cual completa todo ello. Y quería hacer una sugerencia. Aquí en Órgiva hay un grupo de jóvenes extraordinarios y están esperando recibir cierta forma de cultura y educación de algunos adultos que conocen artes marciales, y sería recomendable que entregaran su tiempo a ellos en la educación.
Por favor.
He just wants to thank you for the talk and for having brought fresh breeze to us and bringing this millenary tradition, which is Islam. And he wanted to make a suggestion that there's many beautiful young people here in Orgiva who are expecting and waiting to receive from the adults. And there's also some adults here who have knowledge of martial arts, and he's asking them to please come forward and offer their knowledge to the young people.
This happens here in this space, right?
Aquí está ocurriendo esto.
Yes, there's capoeira here, for instance, as one example. Capoeira is futuwwah.
Yeah.
It's one example. We were talking today about it. And it's great for kids, young people. It's amazing. But like you're saying, it's not one size doesn't fit everyone. And capoeira is a wonderful tool. It's an amazing tool, and we have to keep using it. But there are many tools, and everyone needs to find their tool according to their own fitra to help solve this problem. Inshallah.
But yeah, so if anybody in the community has skills, has trained in martial arts, then add to the program.
We have space here, please. Anyone who has some skills like this, come and speak to us.
Sí, cualquiera que conozca algo de artes marciales o otras habilidades de ese tipo que pueda servir para los jóvenes, que venga a hablar con nosotros. Aquí hay sitio para hacerlo.
I wanted to ask one very small question. No, please, just one small question. You've been talking a lot, you're culminating in a way, you'll talk about the master-student relationship and how this special process, this unique process of submission to a master, someone who has embodied knowledge of their trade or their skill or in a spiritual sense. I wanted to sort of posit the idea that, in fact, it's impossible not to have rites of passage. They're always happening. It's impossible for human beings to go through rites of passage. But the problem is, it's the wrong rites of passage. And for instance, the situation with young people, especially with the internet, and you hear an abdication of our will in the same way, in a counter-initiatic way, is happening, where adults and children are abdicating their will to an artificial intelligence really that we have no idea. I don't have any idea what it is, but I'm abdicating, I'm seeing everyone's abdicating their will, and it is a type of fana. And you hear people talking about Google Shake and we laugh, but children especially, and it started with TV, and I use it, it's not about like this technology is wonderful, has wonderful aspects, but there is an initiatic, counter-initiatic problem. Because it is initiatic, what's happening with it, with the technology. And I wondered just, maybe we need to make a dua, you know, because this is the cure. But I wondered what your thoughts were about this, the use of technology, you know, the automation and this handing over.
Sí, Abdul Malik, que hizo una pregunta sobre, al final ha hablado el doctor sobre la relación maestro-estudiante y someterse al maestro que ha dominado su oficio. Pero también dice que por otro lado, hablando de los ritos de paso, que es imposible no pasar por ritos de paso, simplemente que no son los adecuados. Entonces hay ahora mismo una serie, por ejemplo, está hablando de pues, internet y que la gente está entregándose su voluntad a la inteligencia artificial y aceptando la inteligencia artificial como si fuera algo superior, ¿no? Y que los niños también, ¿no? Y que si la televisión ya hay una especie de contrainiciación, ¿no? Y quería saber su pensamiento sobre esto.
So I think we fundamentally have to use it and understand it as a tool, not as a replacement for anything. And everybody's starting to talk about it being a replacement, even to the point where they're saying, oh, can it replace the human soul, you know, and which is a ridiculous notion in and of itself. But as responsible adults, we have to, for ourselves, limit it. We have to discipline ourselves to not fully letting ourselves submit to this digital engagement. And with our children, we have to limit it. And so what I say is that whatever engagement that you have with the digital interface, you need to balance that out with the same amount in real emergent life every day. So my kids, I tell them if they're gonna whatever time they're on a digital device, they have to spend that same amount of time outside in nature, in emergent engagement, right? Without so that it balances. And then really ultimately I think we should be, if we're going to use the digital artificial intelligence or whatever as a tool, then it should be a tool that puts itself out of business.
Yeah.
Like, so I almost every week I feel like people ask me about putting together a Islamic meditation app, right? Or an app to help heal the heart from an Islamic or Islamic psychology app. And I'm like, okay, but you're not gonna like what my advice is gonna be, because it's gonna essentially be to discontinue the use of the app. Like, so you would be using the app in order to get to the point where you don't use the app, right? Because we have to plug people into a fitri way of living. And this is not a fitri way of living. So it can help us, like I have a Apple Watch that tells me when to breathe. I don't really need it because I know when to breathe, but I like that it does that. And it's a good use of technology for people who forget to breathe, right? That's a positive thing. So we just have to understand it as a tool, not as a replacement for engaging with life.
Decía brevemente que efectivamente hay que aprender a utilizarlo como una herramienta y no como una sustitución, hablando de la inteligencia artificial en concreto, como un sustituto. La gente ahora habla de que va a sustituir a todo, incluso hasta va a sustituir el alma humana, ¿no? Las cosas que propone es, lo primero es tener disciplina nosotros, con no ser esclavos de esta tecnología ni esto del mundo digital, y con nuestros hijos ayudarles o que equilibren el tiempo que pasan con el mundo digital con salir fuera y tener que estar haciendo cosas concretamente fuera en el mundo, entre comillas, real o en el campo, ¿no? Y dice que hay veces que le pregunta mucho que por qué no hacemos una app para meditar o para psicología islámica y tal. Y dice, bueno, vale, pero tiene que ser algo, verás que es algo que al final va a autodestruirse, porque lo que te voy a llevar yo con esta app es a que dejes de utilizar esta app y todas las demás apps, ¿no? Bueno, entonces que lo que tenemos que ayudarnos es a desconectarnos de esto, a desenchufarnos y a enchufarnos más a una manera más fitra de vivir.
Y una cosa que ha dicho sobre que si tu niño utiliza, no sé, su móvil una hora, tiene que hacer una hora de...
Sí, es lo que he dicho, al mismo tiempo de conectar.
Fuera-
2 horas. 1 hora ya, 2 horas.
Mashallah.
Que no escuchar.
Thank you so much, Sidi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Sidi Suleiman also for excellent Sidi Ali, maybe ask you to close with a short recitation, if that's okay, inshallah. Just before, thank you so much for coming. This space is a space that's been running for 7 years. It's run by volunteers. If you feel like you're able or it's possible, you're inspired, there's a small donation box over there. There's also a sister here who's selling some very nice cake. If you would like some sweetness, some cake to help digest this beautiful talk, she's there. And there's no rush to leave. If we can gently start to kind of put the chairs back, we're going to put them over there. But no stress. Enjoy the space here. You're most welcome. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much. So we're asking
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان. الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان صدق الله العظيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Oh, we ask Allah, we ask our Lord to make us benefit from this beautiful talk, this beautiful dialogue. Grant us shifa from what we have missed from this passage, rite of passage, and to grant our children a safe journey to maturity in full faith and health for our children. Bless this community in Orchiva and all our brother communities around the world. And have mercy on Palestine, all those people who are in hardship and pain. Ya Allah, ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم واغفر لنا وارحمنا ولوالدينا ولمشايخنا ولكل من علمنا وربانا ولجميع المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق الناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراط المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدر المقدار العظيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين. الفاتحة.